Hey everybody, I'm Katie, and this is Lacey, and together we are Budget Bitch. You're such a stinker. Hey everyone, thanks for being here. Today I wanted to share a little bit of my debt story. When we're talking about how to get out of debt, it seems important to also know how you got into debt. And so I wanted to tell you my path, but first, let's look at this week's numbers. Here is my monthly income tasks page. You can see I've updated my income and checked off one more task. Not a lot has changed here, just updated my income. Now the juicy stuff, let's look at week 3 expenses. You can see I didn't spend anything at Starbucks. I was able to get through this week with what was left on my card, my Starbucks card. Restaurants, there's a little bit of Chick-fil-A in there. Mama Lucia was kind of expensive, and I'm going to tell you, it wasn't actually as worth it as I had hoped. The Spot, that's my poke bubble tea. I get it every week, but you can see I did it twice. The second time was just an extravagant, ridiculous thing. I really wanted a bubble tea, but to have a bubble tea delivered to your house makes it cost twice as much. So that was dumb, $11.62, but man, it was a good bubble tea, so no regrets. Miscellaneous, I made up for not really spending anything last week in miscellaneous by spending things in miscellaneous. A little bit of the post office. Billy, that's my razor blade refills, which I get every about 3 months, so that's fine. GoFundMe, I have a buddy who is fighting COVID hard, and he is in the hospital, and so I contributed to a GoFundMe for him. Best money spent all month for sure. Vanity table, I ended up getting some nail stuff. As you may know, I'm getting married at the end of this week, and I was thinking I would love to take my soon-to-be stepdaughter and go get a manicure. But with the COVID numbers being what they are, I can't really justify taking her into a place and sitting and exposing us and exposing the workers there. I just couldn't justify it. And so I bought a few different nail, it's like a gel manicure that you can do at home. The good news is it will last me a really long time. The bad news is it was $66. TJ Maxx, I spent $22 on underwear, which was great. I'm doing a fun challenge for myself, which is 40 things before I turn 40. I'm turning 40 in less than 2 months, so 40 things might seem like a lot of items, but some of them are things I'm already doing, like getting married. Some of them are things that I've been putting off for years, and they're just tasks. And I thought, why don't we start this new decade with some new tasks rather than the same old crap that you didn't get done all those years? And then some are items to buy. So I thought it'd be great if I started 40 with new underwear, new socks. I really want to frame my diploma. I have a doctorate, which is still in the envelope. Got my degree in 2014. I can actually see it. It's right over there. It's in the envelope, shoved under a piece of furniture so that nobody steps on it and messes it up. I'm going to get that framed. So TJ Maxx is accomplishing that. But it means I actually spent some money in there and miscellaneous. Sinking funds, no changes there. I'm going to wait until the end of the month to do the subtraction column on my sinking funds because I have spent money towards my car registration and car care. So that will be updated. My January goals, check that out. I bought my OCPs this week. Woo woo! I'm pretty excited, and I've been crushing the weekly check-ins. Good there. I haven't made a lot of progress towards finishing that website. I don't know if it's going to happen because I'm getting married this week, and I'm really, really kind of focusing on that. But I bet if I could find 3 hours to just hunker down, turn my phone on airplane mode, I could do it. I'll see. I'll update you next week on whether or not it gets done. And then at the bottom, here we go, weekly check-in. Starbies, I am ahead of the game. $51 is my goal. I've spent $47.78. That means I can spend, if I just re-up my card one more time and get through the rest of the month, I am golden. Restaurants still ahead by about $20. $189 is the goal. $169.95 is where I am. And then miscellaneous, I am over now. $168 is the goal. $181.88 is where I am now. Now, if I just didn't spend any more in miscellaneous or I was really thoughtful about it, it would be fine. But if you watched my video about getting married, you will know that probably I will have to use a little bit of my miscellaneous funds to pay for some of the wedding items. And I worked on my wedding budget and reconciling that as far as I can at this point. And it does look like I'm going to have to use my miscellaneous money. I think I will be a little bit over budget. My hope is that I can end up being under budget, maybe in restaurants, and things like parking and gas. I didn't spend as much on that as I usually do. So hopefully I can even that out and not be too terribly over budget. I will say, even though this is over, this is the closest that I've ever been since I've started tracking miscellaneous. And I think it's really this weekly check-in, being mindful, it might be a game changer, y'all. Last thing, let's look at Alita payoff. Alita is my car. I made 2 payments on the 22nd, totaling $810. Amazing. So the next payment I make, I think, depends what income comes in first, but it'll get me under 12 grand, which is really exciting. I love being able to see that number go down quickly. If you're looking at the numbers on the right and questioning my math, feel free. I realized this week as I was reconciling that I had been looking at the wrong number on my bank account. On the app, you can only see your payoff amount rather than the principal amount, and it was difficult to see actually where my money was going. So this is all towards the principal. Okay, that's that. Now let's get to the debt story. My history with money in a nutshell. I think it's important to start with childhood. We're not going to hang out there long, but I have found the more I reflect on my parents' relationship to money, the more I can see where I developed my relationship with money. So I will say this first. My family is the best. The most loving people, the most supportive people, and the most well-meaning people you've ever met in your life. I love every member of my family. Historically, they're not amazing with money. And I don't think any member of my family would dispute that. If we look at 30 years ago when I was a kid and, my parents were raising 4 kids, they didn't always make the best money decisions. They did a really great job of teaching us, trying to tell us how to handle money. I remember being in high school and I started gigging a lot, and my mom would help me understand, well, you're going to need to save some of this for taxes because you've made enough money. I was in high school and I understood that taxes were a thing. In the same way, they tried to help us understand budgeting. But in practice, it didn't happen. I never really saw my parents actively budgeting. I didn't have a really deep understanding of them paying for things without stress. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. My mom, in particular, had a really highly irregular income structure. So she got paid a lot at once, and then that money had to last a long time, which is a difficult way to get paid. She also oftentimes didn't get paid on time by the people for whom she was providing services. And so that's hard when you're expecting to make a certain amount of money and then you don't. They were also extremely dedicated to sending all 4 of their children to Catholic school for 12 to 13 years each. Not all of us went to kindergarten. So that's a chunk of change. And when times got tough, they sacrificed other things to make sure that we could go to Catholic school because they felt it was important. As an older child, as a high schooler, I started to be a little bit aware of my mom in particular not always having the best impulse control when it came to buying things or eating out. I come by my love of eating out honestly. And my dad, I'll tell you what, that man could go 60 days and not spend a penny on anything. He'll just eat whatever crackers he has at home. He doesn't have to spend money. But my mom really got a lot of enjoyment from spending money, from buying things or from going out to eat. And it was hard for her to control that impulse. I don't remember what that was like as a kid, so I can't really say. I think maybe by the time I was in high school, the other kids were out of the house because I'm the youngest, and maybe they just had enough income that they could do that. But I still learned that pretty well. As a college student and a grad student and a young adult, I generally had enough money. My parents helped me with college. I also had scholarships in college that paid for a lot of things. I had an assistantship in grad school that paid for a lot of things. And I took out some student loans to help pay for the tuition gaps that weren't covered by scholarships and for living expenses and books and extra fees. There are a lot of fees that aren't covered by certain scholarships. As a young adult out of college, I generally made enough money to pay my expenses. I didn't have a ton of expenses. I've never had particularly expensive taste. And so I was able to pay all my bills most of the time. There were a couple times that I recall being like, oh no, I spent too much on my credit card, because at that time I had one credit card, and I needed help, and my parents would bail me out. I remember that happening a couple times. I'm not sure how many times it actually happened, but it did happen probably several times. Throughout this period, I was generally okay with money, meaning I had mostly enough money. But I was never particularly purposeful about it. I never made a budget and then came back and reconciled it. And I surely did not have a retirement account or a savings account. I think it's important here to acknowledge to all of the young freelancers in the world that in order to have a retirement account, there is a lot of legwork you have to do. I was so surprised when I finally took my first full-time salaried position at 36, 35. That's the first time that someone said, here's a retirement account for you. You put money in from your paycheck and we'll match it. Before that, if I had wanted a retirement account, I would have had to go to the bank and open one myself. Now, that might seem really like, yeah, duh, go open a retirement account. But as a freelancer, you're also saving money to pay taxes because maybe you're not getting those taken out of your paycheck, and you're hustling for the next gig, and you're trying to make all of these part-time jobs work together as a full-time job. And it's just not on your radar. Taxes were also a struggle for me in this period just because I could never quite figure it out. Every year it seemed to be different. I would have a W-2 job and several 1099 jobs, but then that W-2 job changed to a 1099 job, which led me to the one year that I had a stack of 12 1099s and had paid $0 towards taxes that year. Thankfully, the IRS takes payment plans and I was able to pay it off the next year, but I'll be honest that I think taxes are still a struggle for me because they're just so darn complicated. Why are they so complicated? It feels really stressful to try and figure out how much am I going to owe? How much do I need to pay now? Woof. I grew up and lived in Atlanta for the first 30 years of my life, and then I moved to Maryland to get my doctorate, and I have stayed in the area since. While I was in grad school, I lived extremely inexpensively. My first semester, I actually lived with my aunt and uncle rent-free. Then I lived in an apartment, and then the last 2 years, I lived in a shared house where my room for rent was $550, which is nothing in this area. I had a full assistantship, which paid for tuition. It did not pay for fees, which were about $1,000 a semester for me. I worked 20 hours a week in the office for that assistantship, and I had a salary. I also got health insurance through that assistantship. That's when I started working at my part-time job at the church, and so I was making pretty decent money. I was probably making $35,000 to $40,000 a year while I was a full-time doctoral student. I lived very inexpensively, and so I was able to save a lot of money. When I graduated from grad school with my doctorate in 2014, I immediately started working full-time. I didn't really have a hard time finding work. I pieced together several part-time jobs as I had before my doctorate. Because I lived so cheaply in school, I graduated with my doctorate having several $1,000s in savings. It was probably the most I had ever had in savings in my life, honestly. After school, I immediately started working. I hit the ground running, and I didn't really have a hard time finding work. But I was trying to create a more focused career than I had had before I went to school for my doctorate. So there were a lot of business expenses related to that, travel expenses and things like that. I ended up spending all of that savings within that first year. After 2 years as a freelancer, I just decided I was going down the wrong path. It wasn't actually the life I wanted. And I pivoted to a nonprofit administrative job, which was my first time having a full-time job. And it paid extremely badly. It was a great job. It just didn't pay well enough. So that leads us to the debt buildup. I started in 2014, several $1,000s in the bank, ready to go. And then the beginning of 2018, I had $40,000 of credit card debt. There were several contributing factors, and here are the ones that made the most impact. After I graduated, I stayed in that shared house for another 6 months or so, but it was definitely like a college house, and I was now 33 years old, ready to live in a nicer place. So my best friend and I got an apartment. It was more expensive. It was about twice as expensive, honestly. That was an expense I expected, right? I thought my rent is $550 and now it is $1,000 plus parking. Got it. That's more expensive. But there were other expenses I didn't anticipate. When I was in grad school, man, I was working a lot. I was very, very busy, and I ate out a lot. But I was eating out the way a college student does, which is that I was eating at the little cafe in our building, or I was ordering Jimmy John's. So a meal might be $7. Once I was now out of school and living in a different area, I kept the habit of eating out, but I really ratcheted it up into some bougie places. So now a meal wasn't $7, it was $27. And so the frequency of eating out neither increased nor decreased, but the amount per meal really went up. And that spending really got out of control for a little while. I took a couple of big trips that I couldn't quite afford. Now, I didn't put the entire trip on my credit card, but if the trip cost, say, $1,200, I probably paid for $800 of it cash, meaning to pay off the other $400 and then not quite getting around to it. We all know what happens when you do that and the interest starts taking over. That $400 pretty soon is more expensive than the whole trip was initially. I also broke my ankle during this period, and I couldn't drive my car. So I ended up spending 6 weeks taking a lot of Ubers. I tried to get friends to help and drive me around whenever it was convenient for them, but with the nature of my work, it really wasn't feasible to get other people to drive me around all the time. I worked on trying to find a cheaper living situation, and my friend and I were working towards living in a 3-bedroom apartment with another friend. But for various reasons, that living situation fell through with less than a month before our lease was up, and I had to scramble to find another place to live. One of the problems with that is that I have a dog that weighs 95 pounds, and she's not allowed in a lot of apartments. And so the places that I could move were pretty limited. That, combined with the fact that I didn't have a ton of time to search for better options, meant I ended up moving to a place that was more expensive rather than less expensive. Now, the biggest contributing factor was just that every month I was a few $100s short. I just overspent a little bit each month. Yeah, I took a trip, but that one trip or 2 trips, they didn't contribute as much as every month being a little out of control with spending and eating out, or buying some clothes that I didn't really need, or just having rent that was a little too expensive for me to really manage every month. I think it can be quite easy to look back at a situation like this, or look at somebody who is in that situation now and think, just stop spending so much money. It's not that hard. I get it. It's simple, but it is not easy. And I'll give you some examples why. I was trying in those periods, during this period of my life, I was trying not to spend so much money. For example, when I moved to that expensive apartment, I did so rationalizing that I was going to save money in other areas. For instance, my old apartment, I paid for parking. My new apartment, I was not going to pay for parking. I was just going to park on the street. I also didn't have internet in that apartment for 18 months. I just went to the lobby and used their internet because I wasn't willing to pay the $50 a month by myself for the internet. That's when I started wearing hand-me-down clothes from my friends when they would lose weight or they would have clothes they were just taking to Goodwill. I would take the clothes from them, go through, pick out what I liked, and then take the rest to Goodwill. This sweater, in fact, is from my hand-me-down collection. This is from the Hillary collection. I walked to work as often as I could. I also worked several long days a week, and I used to have a dog walker come and take care of Lacey in the middle of the day. Instead, I would come home from work during my lunch hour and let her out on those long days. I also worked a lot. I wasn't just like out hanging out with my friends and partying, and that's why I didn't have enough money. I worked a lot. A normal week for me during that period would have looked like this: Monday, 10 to 10. Tuesday, 10 to 10. Wednesday, 10 to 6. Thursday, 10 to 10. Friday, 10 to 5. Saturday off. Sunday, 10 to 2, 10 to 3, 10 to 5, depending on the schedule. That, for me, was not sustainable. If that's sustainable for you, you better get it, and I'm so proud of you. It was not sustainable for me. And what ended up happening, I have found this to be true always in my life. When I try to maintain that kind of work schedule, I spend more money. Perfect example. If you're working from 10 to 10 on Monday, you're going to bring lunch, maybe some snacks, and dinner with you, all in your bag. By the time you get to dinner, do you want to eat that dinner? No, it's not that exciting. Maybe you do. Maybe you eat the dinner and you're like so proud of yourself because you ate all food from home. And then you get home at about 11 o'clock at night, and tomorrow you have another 10 to 10 day. So you have to prep your lunch and snacks and dinner for tomorrow. Tuesday night, do you think you're excited about eating that dinner? No. No, you are not. By Thursday, you're definitely not excited about it. And 3 weeks later, you're absolutely not having that dinner. So what happened to me is I would find myself away from home for 13, 14 hours a day, and I would end up eating one of those meals out, even if I had committed to not doing so, because the food just didn't seem appetizing after sitting in my bag all day. I also found that by working a lot like that, I just had a lower threshold for stress. I was kind of stressed out all the time. I was constantly thinking what I needed to prep for tomorrow, what's going to happen today, where do I need to be. Those 10 to 10 days, most of them were not in one location. It was my full-time job, and then I would go to one of my part-time jobs. At the time, I had 2 part-time jobs and my full-time job, plus I took extra gigs. So I was just all over the place. And that, for me, provided a mental stress that made it difficult for me to say no to the things that I wanted to say yes to, like ordering a pizza or stopping by and getting an extra coffee that day. And so I just ended up spending more. As I was trying so frantically to make more money, I then would spend more money. Let's talk about the path out now. A lot of this channel is about the path out of debt. What I've done to get out of debt, what I'm still doing to get out of debt, how I'm trying to improve my finances. But I want to highlight just a couple things that are related to this. The path out was not immediate for me. In 2018, when I had to come to Jesus about how much credit card debt I had, I was transitioning into the military at the time. And my family loaned me some money to help me with that transition. Not like a little bit of money, like a lot of money to help me transition. Joining the military actually cost me money. And so this 6-month-ish period of joining the military increased my credit card debt to an extent. That money my family loaned me, I used some of it to pay down my credit card debt, but I also used some of it to act as a cash buffer. I was in the delayed entry program. That means that I started the recruitment process, but I would go to basic training later. For me, I didn't get a lot of notice of when I was going to basic training. I said I can go anytime after this date, but I found out that I was going less than 2 weeks before I went. I had to give my job notice that I was leaving, so I left that job March 2nd. Because of the nature of the job, that was the best thing to do for them and for me. They kept me on part-time until I left, which was great, but I didn't go to basic training until late May. So that meant for 2.5 months, I was only making part-time money. I also knew that after my military training was complete, I would return to Washington, D.C. It made sense for me to keep my apartment then. I looked into getting out of my lease, and that wasn't an option. I looked into subletting, and that didn't work for a couple of reasons. And so it just was best for me to keep the apartment. Unfortunately, I only made about $1,400 a month while I was at basic training, and my apartment cost $1,600 a month. It's also pretty common in the military for your first month at basic training, that pay to be delayed. And so I knew that going in. I did a lot of research before I went, so I knew that was potentially going to be the case. But that meant I needed a bigger cash buffer. So I made the decision to pay 2 months worth of my rent on my credit card before I went to basic training. Y'all, that's $3,200 more on that credit card right off the bat. Unfortunately, I had kind of gotten myself into this situation, and this was the path out. It just meant I had to go a little further into debt before I could start really getting out of debt. When I returned home after my military training, it took me a little while to transition back to normal life, but once I did, we're starting out now 2019, and I solidly had $40,000 of credit card debt again. Plus, now I owed my family some money from their loans to me in 2018. It was then that I started budgeting really hard and consistently reconciling my expenses. But it was such a struggle because I felt so much like I was just chipping away at the debt. I think it can probably feel this way for a lot of people when they're starting a debt snowball, because you don't have that much extra money to throw towards any one of the debts because you're putting it towards so many different debts. Eventually, after I paid off one debt and then another, my snowball started getting bigger. And then when I moved into a way cheaper place to live, then I could really start throwing just fistfuls of cash towards my debt. Once I really started throwing money at that debt, man, it was super fun. It just felt like a game. Unfortunately, I had to go through the chipping phase before I could get to the throwing phase. If anybody out there is just starting out on their debt journey and they're in the chipping phase, I just want to send you a lot of encouragement and let you know that you'll get to the place where it's a game, where it's fun, where you're just throwing money at that debt and watching it be obliterated from your life. Who's ready for some words from Lacey? It's easy to look back at past financial blunders and have regrets. But those trips you took were once in a lifetime, and the experience you gained made you who you are today. Learn from your past, grow into who you want to be, and never feel ashamed of your path. Lacey, you're looking so mournfully at it. Here you go.